Are you ready to unlock your child's potential? Find the perfect blend of learning and fun at MrBTheTeacher.com. Start with his 3 award-winning books, Guidelines for the Successful Student, a closer look at parenting your school-aged child. The essential speller, the feller, and humorous and engaging reading like My Coconut Head. All on sale at Amazon.com. But the learning doesn't stop there. Make any subject fun with the catchy, curriculum-based tunes from Mr. B's Beats for Brains. Please enjoy this sample.
Mercury first and closest, fastest in the race. Venus with its glowing, second in its place. My very eager mother just served us nachos bright. Planets in a solar dance spin around in light. Earth is home to oceans, third one that we see. Mars with red and rocky, fourth in mystery. My very eager mother just served us nachos bright. Planets in a solar dance spin around in light.
Is your child ready to see real academic growth? For personalized expert tutoring, connect with Mr. B through Varsity Tutors. Details are at MrBTheTeacher.com. That's MrBTheTeacher.com, your partner in learning success.
You're listening to A Teaching Moment with Mr. B.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 51st episode podcast of A Teaching Moment with Mr. B. In this podcast, we're going to talk about the literacy cliff. Why 8th grade feels like 3rd grade again. What an interesting topic. My name is Mr. B the Teacher, Steve Burgess, and today we're diving into a topic that many parents, teachers, and students are experiencing, but they may not fully understand. Today's title, as I say, is called The Literacy Cliff. Why 8th grade feels like 3rd grade again. Let me begin with a question for you. Have you ever worked with an 8th grade student who struggles with reading comprehension, vocabulary, and even writing complete sentences, and thought, this feels like 3rd grade all over again? If your answer is yes, you are not alone. This phenomenon is what I call the literacy cliff. So you might ask, what is the literacy cliff, Mr. B? And the answer to that is, the literacy cliff refers to a sudden and noticeable drop in the student's ability to effectively read, comprehend, and engage with grade-level text, often becoming most visible around middle school, especially in 7th and 8th grade. So all of a sudden, there's a large group of students who go through this literacy cliff process, this stage, where they've learned so many concepts when they were in elementary school. But then all of a sudden, when they enter middle school, they forget a lot of the foundational skills in reading, writing, and math that they once knew in elementary school. And this is what we call the literacy cliff. But here's the key. The problems that these students are having did not begin in 8th grade. It started years earlier, often around 3rd grade. And you might say, well, why 3rd grade? What has 3rd grade got to do with students who are in 8th grade? Well, I'll tell you this. To begin with, my philosophy has always been that in the first 3 years of a child's school life, students are learning how to read. After that, they're reading to learn for the rest of their lives. Just as we as adults, as educators are reading to learn. So the first 3 years of a child's school life, typically from kindergarten to third grade, the student learns how to read. By the time they get to third grade is what we call a critical turning point. They should be learning how to read. They should be reading how to learn. They should be reading to learn. So up until third grade, they were learning to read. Now they're reading to learn. So I just wanted to clarify that for you so you know that that's my philosophy about literacy. So if a child has not learned how to read in the first place, if there are gaps in those skills, literacy skills which are essential, such as phonics and phonetic analysis and vocabulary development, then how are they going to read to learn in third grade and beyond successfully? They would not, because they would not have had these skills to help them master the foundation of what they're learning, and they would not be able to succeed. And the goal of reading is comprehension. The ultimate goal of reading is comprehension. So if a student hasn't mastered foundational literacy skills by the end of third grade, such as reading fluency, decoding, vocabulary, and basic comprehension skills, they tend to fall behind quietly at first. So what happens then between fourth and eighth grade, you might wonder? Here's where things get tricky. Between fourth and eighth grade, the text that they read becomes more complex. Vocabulary also becomes more academic. Sentences become longer and more abstract, and students must analyze, infer, and explain the concepts and skills and topics that they're reading. But if that student is still struggling to decode or understand basic text, how are they going to become more efficient in these skills that they learn between fourth and eighth grade, such as reading more complex texts, developing stronger vocabulary skills that are more academic, being able to read, write, and comprehend sentences that are longer, such as complex and compound sentences, more abstract sentences, and how are they going to analyze, infer, and explain the skills and concepts that they're learning if they're still struggling with basic decoding and basic comprehension skills, basic vocabulary skills, basic fluency skills. You know what happens when they still struggle to decode and understand basic text and understand basic comprehension skills? They start guessing. They start avoid reading as much as possible. They lose confidence because they don't want to look embarrassed in front of their other peers. And they fall further behind each year, year after year, especially that a lot of them goes unnoticed. And that's why I say they start deteriorating in their progress slowly but surely, quietly but surely. By the time they reach eighth grade then, the gap has widened so much that it feels like they've gone backwards into third grade. So with each learning gap, for every year that passes with a student where learning gaps are not being addressed, the gap gets wider and wider and wider because the complexity of their task gets more difficult with each grade year. Does that make sense to you? Right? You see what I'm saying? So why does it feel like third grade again when you work with middle school students sometimes? Because I often see that they have difficulty applying or identifying the main idea. They have difficulty with identifying what the main idea is. They don't understand about the topic sentences of each paragraph. They don't understand that the main idea is usually found in the first paragraph, maybe the first couple sentences, or towards the end of the first paragraph. And many times the clue is in the title of the text. They don't understand how to identify the main idea. They don't understand how to supply supporting details to go with the idea. They might have trouble summarizing a passage because they don't understand the passage. They're not even fluent in reading the passage in the first place. They don't know the key vocabulary words, which leads me to my next point. They might be so weak in vocabulary that they have no concept of what the words mean. So they never mastered the art of applying context clues to read around the words that they're unfamiliar with so that they could have a better comprehension of what the word might mean as used in the text. But if they never understood basic vocabulary in the first place, how are they going to then understand more complex vocabulary? And then they struggle with writing complete organized thoughts. They'll often have subjects missing in their sentences or predicates missing. And subject is who or what the sentence is mainly about. A predicate is what the subject is doing or what the subject is like or be in the sentence. So for example, if I say the dog is taking the walk, the dog is the subject of that sentence. Is taking a walk would be the predicate. So they have trouble identifying simple subjects and predicates, never mind more complex subjects and predicates. These are skills we typically would have mastered by the end of elementary school. So what is happening? So what is the meaning of all this then, Mr. B? Why is it that there's a lot of middle school students, particularly as they approach 8th grade, why is there such a large learning gap? It's because their foundation was never solid in the first place. The skills and concepts that they should have mastered in early elementary school were not mastered, such as literacy skills. So it's just like building on a house with a weak base. If you don't have a strong, solid foundation in which to build on, everything else that you build on top of it becomes unstable. How could you? It's like the foolish man who built a house on sand. You cannot build a house on sand because sand is not stable, it's not solid. So without that solid foundation, you were not able to build anything that would last and would be strong, structurally strong, because there's a weak foundation below. So first, we must build on the foundation. We must teach them foundational skills, and then they'll be able to build through scaffolding efforts on top of that foundation. So let's not forget the emotional impact that this has on the children. Never mind the academic impact, let's talk about the emotional impact that these learning gaps have. When students experience the literacy cliff, they often feel embarrassed, they avoid participation, they shut down during reading or writing tasks, they avoid reading or writing in class, they avoid volunteering to do it. And yet they believe that they are not smart because of lack of confidence. So they rather be a recluse. They rather withdraw from participating actively in class. This is especially true for students who once did well in the earlier grade levels, and it is known that they did well. Let's say they did well, they aced it in 5th grade, they received A's and B's. Now they might be attaining D's and F's. But why is that? That's because there are certain learning gaps that were never addressed. So once they did well in school, in elementary school, and now they're failing, or they test well in the early grades, but now they struggle in class performance. The frustration is real, ladies and gentlemen, and they must be addressed with patience and understanding. These problems, these learning gaps must be addressed with patience and understanding. So then you ask the question, so how do we fix this literacy cliff issue, Mr. B? How do we fix it? Can it be fixed? The good news is, yes, this can be fixed. Definitely, these learning gaps can be closed, but it requires going back to the basics. So here are some key strategies that you must follow in order to close the learning gap or avoid the literacy cliff. Number one, they must diagnose the gaps that need to be closed. So you need to find out exactly where the breakdown is. Is it phonics? Are we talking about literacy? Is the literacy cliff widening due to the lack of phonetic understanding? Or is it in fluency? Is it in vocabulary? Or is it comprehension of basic texts? And once you could identify these skill areas in their literacy that they have failed to master, you could then go on to step 2 and rebuild that foundation. Yes, even in 8th grade, you may need to revisit 2nd and 3rd grade reading skills. I've taught many middle school students who needed to revisit 2nd and 3rd grade reading concepts, such as phonics, such as decoding 2-syllable words, maybe 1 syllable, phonetically decoding the phonetic sound of each letter. And then, before long, with consistent practice, they were able to move on to multi-syllable words, and therefore they were able to form sentences and paragraphs. And many of them, in the space of a few months, were able to write essays. So it can be done. So not only do you need to revisit basic reading skills, you need to revisit sentence structure and basic grammar, such as what is a noun? You'd be surprised to find out how many middle school students don't even know the difference between a verb and a noun, or an adverb and an adjective, or a pronoun and a noun. And that's okay, because that can be fixed. We might have to revisit these skill areas concurrently with the texts, with the subjects that they're learning now. So you might have to do a lot of extra teaching, but that's okay. The hard work is going to pay off in the end. So first of all, you need to diagnose the gaps. In the second place, you need to rebuild the foundation. And then in the third place, you need to use high interest, lower level texts. And you might say, well, Mr. B, my child is in 8th grade. Why should I use lower level texts? Because it's going to help build their confidence. If they can master the basic skills with basic level texts, just think how much confidence this is going to be. And let's not ignore the first part, using high interest. It's amazing that a lot of students are faced with texts that are boring and difficult for them to read. We must present texts that they are highly interested in. And you might say, well, Mr. B, what if they're into sports? Well, let them read some fiction and non-fiction texts about sports. There's nothing wrong with that. I've learned some of my greatest vocabulary words from reading comic strips as a little boy back in England. So that is not uncommon or not unfounded at all. I've learned words like unprecedented and nemesis since I was in elementary school because I was reading comic strips like The Amazing Spider-Man and The Adventures of Superman and The Adventures of the Incredible Hulk. So you learn some words, some key vocabulary just from reading comic strips. Have them read a variety of texts, but it should be based on their level of interest, and yet lower level text. High interest, lower level text. So they need materials then that matches their reading ability. You must start on their reading level. If you're going to pull someone out of a hole that they fell in, let's say they fell into a pit, you have to lower your body in order to pick them up, right? And then you pull them by the hand. You can't just stand up from high up in the air and reach down and pull somebody up. You got to lower your body to their level to bring them up, to bring them to the level that you're on. Well, the same is true with bringing up these students' abilities and skills. You must stoop, as the saying goes, you must stoop to conquer. You must reach down and start with them where they're at on their level. And then you're about to teach them the foundation skills or reteach these foundational skills. And then over time, you're about to give them more complex texts, more and more towards their grade level, until one day they'll be able to master their own grade level texts. And you must give them ability, reading ability. You must match their reading ability no matter how low it is at the moment, but still respecting their age and their interests. So an 8th grader might be into science. They might be into artificial intelligence. Well, have them read about it. They might be into space exploration. Have them read about it, but they might be functioning on the 2nd grade level. Then take out a book from the library on the 2nd grade level about space exploration and have them read about going into outer space, identify the key vocabulary, and teach them how to decode these words and use them in example sentences that they might write. I do this with my students all the time, and you'd be amazed how much they improve in no time to grade level texts. Teach vocabulary explicitly. Academic vocabulary is key to success in all subjects. When I say teach vocabulary explicitly, I mean teach the graphical root meanings of the word. So if you're talking about biology, bio means life, ology means the study of. Have them break down the graphical root meanings, the etymology and the morphology of words, the study of the graphical root meanings of words. Have them learn and decode what each part means. If they're studying words with prefixes and suffixes, teach them prefixes and suffixes. You'd be amazed at how many middle school students don't even understand prefixes and suffixes in longer words, like unprecedented. Well, un means not, okay? So, precedent, something that is set before everybody else. Academic vocabulary is the key to success in all. So teach them vocabulary that is explicitly used in each subject area. In math, students should be learning math vocabulary. In science, they need to be learning science vocabulary. In language arts, they need to learn language arts vocabulary. Social studies, they need to learn social studies vocabulary. In every subject, even if it's music or art, have students learn the vocabulary. And I always start off with vocabulary in the beginning when I introduce a new topic, because it's so vital that the students understand the key vocabulary used in that topic, which will enable them to develop their comprehension and their fluency. They will then have a better understanding of the topic through comprehension, and they'll be able to read more about the topic and develop a deeper appreciation of the topic because they understood and learned the vocabulary involved. And then step 5, incorporate writing daily. Reading and writing goes hand in hand, just as speaking and listening goes hand in hand. Have them start off with short responses and daily journaling, which will then reinforce their comprehension of the text, and therefore they're able to write essays in the end. The goal is that they're able to write sound essays that are effective, and they will enjoy doing it. And writing has structure just as reading has structure. So teach the vocabulary explicitly, have them incorporate writing daily. Area number 6, help them build confidence first. It's confidence first. As I said in the previous podcasts that I've covered before, we need to celebrate the small wins of our students, not just whatever big win we're looking for. So if they finished a sentence correctly, celebrate that win. They capitalized at the beginning of each sentence, you should celebrate that, because they were not doing that before. If a student who had problems finishing a paragraph, at least 5 sentences, celebrate that victory when they finish that paragraph. And teach them, well, yes, it's a group of sentences that shares a complete thought, shares the same complete thought. And when they know how to transition to another paragraph, that means there's another complete thought that they're going to start to talk about. Teach them the concept of a paragraph and celebrate it when they do accomplish that. When they understand the passage well, when they can answer comprehension questions with less and less prompting from you, celebrate those small wins too. And even if it is writing a complete sentence, like I said, when they could not have written a complete sentence, even a simple sentence at first, and then teach them how to write a compound sentence where they use for, or, nor, yet, but, and so. And they could write complex sentences where they have a subordinate clause and an independent clause. Celebrate each win, each step of the way. So we should be the greatest cheerleaders for them. And as educators, we are huge cheerleaders. I always tell my students when I teach them online that I would be their greatest cheerleader. I would cheer them on all the way to the end of the school year beyond taking their final exams. Because it's so important that you're there every step of the way with your students. So you could champion them. And I teach my students that going through a school year is like running a marathon. There are 4 quarters or 4 laps to run. And your goal is to master all 4 laps and arrive at the finishing line at the end of the 4th quarter. Okay? And if there's students in schools that have 3 semesters at the end of that final semester, your goal is to reach that final semester, that final quarter at the end, and succeed by being promoted to the next grade level. The ultimate goal is to graduate from high school so that you are college ready and you're ready to work in the world in which we live. So here are my final thoughts about the literacy cliff. The literacy cliff is real, ladies and gentlemen, but it's not permanent. So when do we recognize it? We need to recognize it as soon as possible. It's just like recognizing the warning signs of someone who has an ailment or disease. The sooner you recognize it, the more you can respond to it with intentional, structured support. It's like the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So when we recognize it early and respond to it with intentional, structured support, students can catch up, they can regain confidence, and they can thrive academically, which will therefore lead to higher test scores and greater promotional prospects, and less of retention problems. So they're most likely not to be retained. And remember that it's not that the student cannot learn, it's that they're missing some key building blocks in the foundation when they were learning it. And with the right support from teachers, parents, educators, and the community, all the stakeholders alike, we can help our students to succeed. We can help them rebuild in their foundational skills that they had not mastered before. So, if you found this episode helpful, please share it with a parent, teacher, or colleague who needs to hear this message. Because I know there are many out there who needs to hear this message. The literacy cliff, why 8th grade feels like 3rd grade again. And if you're looking for personalized support for your student, feel free to reach out to me at Mr. Be the Teacher LLC through mrbetheteacher.com. And while you're there, you can check out our products and services that we have to offer, including my award-winning book, Guidelines for the Successful Student, A Closer Look at Parenting Your School-Age Child, which is a book I wrote to encourage parents, to teach them, to give them a blueprint of how to raise their school-age child and so that they could become successful students and productive citizens in the 21st century. So until next time, we need to keep teaching, keep learning, and keep making a difference in our lives. Thank you for listening to this podcast, number 51. And as the African proverb says, it takes a village to raise a child.